This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
Get lost in the acoustic brilliance of 3D audio that surrounds you. Feel the embrace of the massage seats that adapt to your every move. Experience the warmth of a vehicle that welcomes you as you approach. We could tell you what makes a Lincoln SUV so extraordinary, but don't take our word for it. Take it on a test drive at the Lincoln Summer Invitation, with exclusive offers on now, only at your local Lincoln retailer.
London was the fintech capital, not by accident, not by luck, but by design. Smart regulations, stupid levels of talent, bags of capital, all squeezed within inside the M25 like a pressure cooker. And for years, it really, really worked. We weren't just on the map, we were the bloody compass. But here's the thing about being top dog. Everybody is chasing you, and lately you can feel it. London's just not punching like it used to. The strides have shortened a little bit, the noise has dulled. Feels a little bit like we're writing the memoirs about a golden age instead of building the next one. So what happened? And more importantly, what now? That's what we're going to be digging into in this episode. Can London still lead the world in fintech and tech innovation, or has the crown slipped for good? This whole thing was sparked by a conversation between me and Val. Like, we chatted about this one on LinkedIn, got into it on DMs, and we thought, bugger it, let's just have this conversation in front of a bunch of people. Like, do we think this is a full-blown interrogation of where London's fintech soul went? Probably, but let's see where this goes anyway. We'll get into what made London unstoppable in the first place, where we dropped the ball, and what it'll actually take to get that edge back. If you've not watched it already, what I would say, if you want a preamble of this one, go check out the 11 years documentary that we made. It's got something like 250,000 views and counting. Tells the story of how we got our thing together, the ecosystem from very beginning all the way through that, grit and grind to make it successful. The link will be in the show notes. Check that one out today. I've got two absolutely brilliant voices joining me for this one. We couldn't do this without, first up, Valentina Kristensen, Corporate Affairs Director at OakNorth. How's it going, Val? Look what happens when we get into it on DMs. We have to put it on the record in audio, don't we?
I know. I've been looking forward to this. So thanks so much for having me on. And doing really well. Thanks.
No worries at all. And I mean, I've seen lots of content from you on this as well. It's like it's sort of a pressure cooker vibe, I feel a little bit, for both me and you, actually. We've both had our little moments where we've been like, oh, this is really annoying, and put it down. And actually, there's been a lot of momentum on both sides of this argument, I'd say, in terms of, it's not quite Brexit, people being pro and negative, but, very much people are sort of coming out on whether they think it's a positive vibes for the UK or not right now.
100%. I'm a proud European, so I'm glad to be flying the flag today.
Literally, yeah. And next up, we have Oliver Smith, who is a freelance journalist. You know Oliver. If you haven't read something he's done over the last decade or so, then you really can't claim to be a fintech insider, can you? Welcome back to the show, Oliver. How are you doing?
Thanks, David. Yeah, really good to be here. Excited to be talking about UK competitiveness and how we're doing. I sadly was made redundant a few weeks ago as news editor of Fortune. There's been a lot of media job cuts recently, but I'm so excited to say that in just a few weeks' time, I'll be rejoining the fintech sector with a new role that I hope I can share more with you guys very soon.
Exciting. Yeah, it's an interesting time in the media space, but conversely, equally, lots and lots of interesting things to do and talk about. So yeah, looking forward to seeing where you, foreshadowing, where will you pop up shortly. So, all right, let's get into it and have a look a little bit about, well, has the UK lost its groove with regards to everything that's happening in the fintech space? So maybe if we sort of start with an easier one, then do you think the UK is still the perfect ecosystem for fintech? Val, let's get you in first of all and set the scene, because having read, I know what you're going to say.
Look, I mean, I absolutely love the UK, and I think It has so much to offer, right? It's the things we've heard about before. You've got very forward-thinking regulators in the PRA and the FCA, right, with their regulatory sandboxes, which have been replicated and copied by regulators all over the world. You've got a common rule of law. You're geographically placed very well to do business with the Far East, with the Middle East, with the US. You've got incredible talent. We have some of the world's top universities here. 4 of the world's top 10 universities are, in and around London. You've got incredible research coming out of those universities. The pool of capital available, it certainly doesn't compete with the US, but it is, it has really developed hugely in the last sort of 10, 15 years. In London, specifically, you've got, the tech talent, the financial center, and the policymakers, all within a few tube stops of each other. And that is something that you just can't replicate anywhere else. If you look at somewhere like the US, you obviously have the financial center in New York, policymakers in Washington, and the tech in Silicon Valley in California. So there's it's a pretty big country, and so there's in different time zones and several hours flights from each other. So I think the UK has a huge amount to offer.
I feel like there might be a large but coming.
Yes, but I think we have so many challenges, right? In terms of and we've talked about this before, but we have a real kind of self-deprecating approach in the UK. I'm from Denmark, and I mean, if we had even a quarter of the things that the UK has, we'd probably be shouting about it from the rooftops. But in the UK, it feels like we're always kind of putting ourselves down. There isn't really much celebration of entrepreneurship in the same way that there seems to be in places like the US, and certainly failure. There's a much bigger fear of failure here. So culturally, when someone sort of starts a business, it fails, then they won't necessarily look to start another business. Whereas you could be in a situation in the US where someone starts a business, fails multiple times, and then the 5th time they start a business, they build a unicorn company, right? And you just don't hear stories like that in the UK. Equally, in the US, you have much more of a kind of an ecosystem where those who have exited companies, even if they weren't founders, but they were early stage employees, and that company had some kind of exit or liquidity event, those people then put that money back into the ecosystem, right? They're angel investors. They maybe go on to start their own ventures. And again, that seems to be much more of the the culture in the US. There is a real kind of obsession, I feel, with where companies choose to IPO. And I don't know, in a world where money is so digital, whether that really matters that much. But then I can also see the other side of the coin, that if you want to be a global financial center, you really need a well-functioning exchange. So I think, there's lots of challenges and lots of stuff that we'll get into further in the podcast.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? All those ingredients, all of those things that made it successful. The organizations, the things, like, they're still there, aren't they? But maybe, Ollie, coming to you, what do you think? Is the perfect mix still here in the UK?
Yeah, I think the elements of success that Val identified are still very, very strong. And I think if you look at the rankings and the league tables, the UK isn't falling down them when it comes to the amount of funding, when it comes to the amount of unicorns. We're very much holding our own. I think what is changing is that the excitement in tech generally has shifted. If I think back to 2018, 2017, fintech was the hot new thing, and there was a lot of excitement around that. But fast forward to today, and it is very fair to say that AI has become the new kind of hotness in tech and in investing more generally. And I think that's what's happened to a certain extent. I don't think the UK has lost its appeal. I think fintech has shifted. It's become more mature. I think AI has become that growthy area. And a lot of investors are shifting their portfolios towards AI. A lot of fintechs are shifting their categorization into AI. They don't really want to be called a fintech anymore. They want to be called an AI company because they can raise more money, they can get a better valuation. And I think that has, that's kind of hit us as well.
Is that a focus thing? I've sort of likened it a little bit before to, championship boxer, like a world title, like, willing to get up at 3 a.m. and drink all the eggs and do all the runs and, get to number one. And, maybe that stuff's a little bit harder to do. And like, did we earn the success the first time by having the right people in the right place and a truly coordinated effort? But, was success actually the start of the decline? Because essentially once you're at the top, it's harder to maintain it than it is to get there in the first place. Val, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is definitely some truth to that. If you're starting from such a high position, then of course it's much harder to maintain it. Whereas if you're starting from a low position, you can gradually increase from there. I think it's also just what happens in a kind of natural maturation of an industry, right? I mean, fintech, has been going now for, if you think back to like the OGs of fintech, and you rewind the clock, you're sort of saying like, whatever, 15 to 17 years probably in the UK. So there's that sort of natural process that happens where you have certain players that then continue to grow, and they get, they reach, very large valuations, they become profitable, they maybe go on to acquire other fintechs. You have some that kind of naturally, as is part of the process, they sort of fall, they don't manage to continue and they sort of fall off the growth trajectory.
But is that then the place that we are in that cycle? So, because like you say, if you talk to investors now and they go, yeah, we've invested in fintechs like, Revolut and Monzo. And I'm like, they're like giant companies now. Like they're really big things. Yeah. Like that's not like the startup ecosystem. So is it just that the startup ecosystem is the bit that sort of changed and actually, everybody wants to back a winner, don't they? Now that all these guys are swinging for bigger and bigger fences, then, their rounds are never not full, but it's not, it doesn't have the same. I always degrade things down into like basic pop culture reference stuff, but it's like the difference between like that bands that nobody knew about and it was the early thing to, it being mainstream, and I kind of feel like the early hungry to start a new thing. There's a million different problems we can solve. There's an alignment between the regulators and the governments and the like there's not that sort of Gordian knot chopping through all of these things like there was, and maybe that's the bit that we're missing. Or are we just old? Are we just old and we're like, it wasn't as good, it was better when we were doing it, and that like
no, but I think it's just, look, COVID did change a lot of things, and I think also, and really the months, and even really the years that have that have followed it, you saw a real shift in terms of the kind of the economic landscape. For my whole adult life, interest rates were never higher than 0.75%. And then, a couple of years ago, that completely shifts, right? And that does mean that people really had to do a 180 in terms of how they manage their finances. Suddenly mortgages became so much more expensive. Suddenly investing became a lot more attractive, became a lot less attractive, while saving became a lot more attractive because you could suddenly get, you can make your money go further just by keeping it in a very safe, safe bank account that pays you some interest. And this is where we're now seeing a lot of the debates going on around things like cash ISAs, right? And the government, obviously looking at reforming that ahead of the budget, but then you've also seen so much fluctuation in the markets driven by things like Trump tariffs, again, COVID and the years that followed, the emergency Liz Truss budget, and so many other, peaks and troughs, which then have completely changed people's habits when it comes to their wealth management, investing, saving, their day-to-day banking and personal finances. So I think there's been a kind of a real change in the industry as well. We had a real period of a long, of a decade or so. And I mean, if I think about OakNorth, we launched in September 2015. Okay, fine. Several months later, the UK made this very big decision to leave the EU, right? So you had Brexit, you then had the negotiation that followed, then you had COVID, then you've had the cost of living crisis. So it's not exactly been a stagnant period, but in terms of things like interest rates, as I say, that was something that for, 13 years, we didn't see interest rates going higher than 0.75%, which was really unprecedented in the UK's history. And then, of course, they shot up, and they're now, we'll see what the decision from the MPC is tomorrow, but they're still obviously several multiples higher than they have been historically.
Yeah. It's a funny one, isn't it? When you start to sort of look at all of those different things and some of the things that we've done that have made changes, but some of them that we didn't even know were going to have these knock-on effects on the ecosystem. And I feel like everybody's broken the word ecosystem because consultants have used it so horrendously. But it's like a solar eclipse, but actually like 7 planets, like alignment. We needed all of these things in the right variables and the right level of intensity to get the outcome that we got over that period of time. So, and I guess really what we're trying to figure out here is like, was that a moment? Or is it something that, can you harness this power to do it again? Or is it something, because as you say, with Brexit or, with COVID, actually, where we have lost, and undoubtedly, investment has changed and these things have happened and, we've lost great people. Other places have gained from it, right? You've seen, Oliver, you cover and have covered for a long time multiple sort of ecosystems. Is everybody sort of having this kind of conversation, or has other people benefited where we've lost?
I think to a certain extent, but I think the kind of blue ocean opportunity that there was there in the 2010s has definitely narrowed. The opportunities now are more niche, they're more specific, and they probably don't facilitate the kind of huge mass market consumer, mainstream, as you would say earlier, consumer businesses. It's really tightened. And that's the same everywhere because the low-hanging fruit has been picked up, as well as Val was saying, the funding environment, the interest rate shifting. That has affected everyone, I think. The question is now, it's more of a war of attrition where we're fighting over the resources that are left. And some markets are fighting more aggressively than others. I think the UK hasn't done a great job in this new environment at fighting, and I think there's been some signs that that's starting to change. But yeah, I wouldn't say the UK has performed significantly worse than other markets. I think we've done okay. I think globally there's just been a real shift.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I've definitely heard this, and I know Val, you have as well. Is there's often a debate every so often about why hasn't the UK created a big tech player? Like, where's our Google? Where's our Facebook? Like, why haven't we done these things? Like, what do you say to that? Like, is that something that we should be aspiring to, or is there an easy fix for why we haven't done that, or is it just a confluence of all of these forces?
I think, it's absolutely something we should be aspiring to, and it is something we're aspiring to, right? Labour has said that they want to create, a $1 trillion company in the UK, while they're in power. So I think, it's definitely a worthy aspiration. And we see some fantastic businesses that are obviously they've still got a very, very long way to go, but they're certainly in the, decacorn status. So we have all the ingredients to achieve that. I think the challenge is that you end up with, businesses reaching a certain scale, and then maybe they get a large chunk of US investment or Middle East investment, and then they don't really feel as tied to the UK. You just don't have the growth investors in the UK that you see in other markets, in the Far East, in the Middle East, in the US. So, the 9-figure mega rounds, or even, 10-figure rounds like we're seeing with OpenAI, right? Those just don't happen in the UK or even really in Europe, right? You see rounds of, a few hundred million. You never really see rounds of several hundred that are being led by a UK European investor, and certainly not rounds in the billions. So I think then, you have a natural bias towards a market like the US if that's where your, a lot of your cap table is. The London Stock Exchange Group has put out a lot of research around sort of trying to bust some of the myths around valuations in the UK versus the US. And actually, it's true that if you're a European or UK business that doesn't have a particularly large US presence, there is a question mark as to why the US is the right place for you. Because if you don't have that brand awareness, it's a bit like why would you choose the US? But if you think, to businesses like, it's not a fintech, but Meta, or Facebook as it was back then, right? When Mark Zuckerberg was offered $1 billion as like an 18-year-old for Facebook, and he turned it down. And you just think, what kind of 18-year-old would turn down $1 billion? But he obviously, even at that point, could see and was obviously being advised by, I'm sure, a lot of very smart people that the company was worth a lot more than that, and that if he kept growing it with his team, that it could be worth, many, many multiples more than that in the future, which is very much the case. But I think how many, UK 18-year-olds would turn down $1 billion for their company, or European 18-year-olds, the number's probably very, very small. And it's just because, again, it comes back to this kind of culture. Like, America is very much like, it's the American dream. It's blitz scaling. It's fail fast. It's move fast and break things. It's all those kinds of cliches, but they're sort of kind of true. And I think, that is something that, you really can't change overnight. It's not something that we're going to say, oh, it's going to happen in the next few years, or it'll happen with the next government, whatever. I think it's something that happens over decades. But that is something that is definitely in the water in the US that we don't seem to have here. An ingredient.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny, isn't it? The ecosystem that we referred to earlier on, the sort of everything in the M25, vibe, actually, the beauty of it is that it's all close. The negative of it is this is actually a tiny little island, isn't it? So, the sandbox that the FCA created were essentially, we were a fintech sandbox for the world, and actually, inevitably, when things scale beyond our borders, I don't mean that in a Brexiteer or a, immigration stance in any way, shape or form. I mean it more like, when it goes out of our jurisdiction, actually, it doesn't belong to us anymore, does it? And that is a problem, isn't it? But equally, it's like anything. Look, the internet was invented here, but it has to scale for it to be globally successful, doesn't it? It's just, we seem to be an island of inventors without having the ability to execute at scale, does it?
And I think a lot of these markets are playing, quite aggressively. I've heard of the regulators in the Middle East who very much want boots on the ground, and offices opened and headquarters moved, to unlock the opportunities that they have out there. Or you often hear about American venture investors who want offices opened in the US if they're going to put that money in. So there's a very a competitive game happening, which is pulling companies away from the UK. It's incentivizing them to relocate, to open offices. Stripe is often held up as a US success story. I'm always reminding people that actually, it was founded in Ireland. It was originally, it was here before it went over there and had all that success. And the UK, we don't play that game as much, or as well, maybe. We are, as we said earlier, much more conservative, quiet, in our success, and we're less aggressive in trying to keep companies here. We're reading about Monzo, Starling, looking to the US already, IPOing over there potentially. It's really a shame to see, because it'd be great if we could do more to keep them here.
I think the point on aggressiveness is really hits the nail on the head, because I've heard from so many fintechs, and certainly our experience, that that you get kind of the red carpet being rolled out by NASDAQ and by the New York Stock Exchange. It's like every time you have a big announcement, they're like, we'll put it up on all of our screens in Times Square, and we'll put it all over the the trading floor, and come on our podcast, and we'll do a TV segment for our YouTube channel, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, again, we're just much more modest in the UK, and we aren't as aggressive. And so if those conversations, are happening, years before a company's going to IPO, then the relationship building and everything is happening there. And it's sort of bringing that comfort to a company, even if they don't necessarily have a big US presence at that point in time.
Yeah. I mean, and we have seen, the one that sort of jumps to mind is Barney over at Clio. Actually, we've seen organizations that have done sort of okay over here, but then just done amazing things when they're going over to the US. Because exactly like you say, Val, they've been sort of embraced for what they're trying to do. There's not a a dirty feeling about them wanting to go and make money and make things happen. And yes, there needs to be a win-win, but it's like, actually, no, the sort of, like you say, the American dream of it becoming a success and you becoming a success. That's not, I feel like we're all doing sort of slightly bad Hugh Grant impressions of apologizing for everything that we're doing and what we've done. And that actually almost leads to it being a negative cycle, doesn't it, rather than a positive one?
There's definitely a stigma around like wealth creators and wealth in the UK. And that's really been, obviously something that's been in the headlines so much since we've had the new government coming in because of some of the changes that were announced in the last budget. And you sort of, you hear so many of these stories about X number of millionaires are leaving the UK and going to places like Dubai and Milan, and Florida and other places like that. So, I think there is just seem to be a bit of a stigma around that. Whereas like, in the US, again, that's really celebrated. If you go to like a philanthropic event or a charity event, it's like a competition of who can write the biggest check and almost, shout about it in the room full of everybody, in front of everybody, which again is just so not the British way.
No.
And we support a number of charities at OakNorth. We donate 1% of our profits to charity. And we work with a lot of charities that have a UK and US presence. And you go to the events and you're just like, it's just a complete chalk and cheese in terms of, what the kind of philanthropic community is like in both places. And the UK is incredibly generous, but it's just much more modest. And I think this is the same about celebrating everything: success, wealth creation, entrepreneurship. But again, I think it's a cultural thing. I don't really know how you change that, because a lot of that British modesty is also really wonderful and important for so many other business contexts. But as you say, I think, a nation of inventors, but then it's like, how can we scale that and create companies that could, be trillion-dollar companies one day?
Yeah. How much do you reckon? So there's loads of process, and actually there's loads of policy and regulation and all these different things. But how much of it comes down to people as well? Because actually, whether it's Rishi or whether it's Anne or whoever, you've got to have mad people who are going to go and try and do something that probably they shouldn't try as well. But equally, how much of that comes down to the people in the processes and ecosystems and everything that's there as well? So Chris Woolard over the FCA, would say himself, he wasn't a regulator. We used to work at the BBC, it's actually you bring people in who sort of know better and don't know better at the same time, and I'm thinking of, Charlotte over at Open Banking, Anna Wallace in the FCA, loads of different people in that ecosystem that felt like a collective of people who were just razor focused on making everything better, and collectively, there was nobody. I never ever felt like there was anybody who was like, this is how I get my MBE, OBE, or whatever. It felt like it was for the greater good of the ecosystem. So, how much are we sort of missing those gatekeepers, but in a good way?
I mean, look, I think, we still have those gatekeepers, and, we saw so much time and investment go into fintech, right? We had the Khalifa review a few years ago, led by Ron Khalifa. That's another, person's name I'd sort of put in the mix there, of people who are just so forward thinking and innovative and, have a real passion for the sector. Absolutely, if you're an entrepreneur, whether it's the Rishi Kosas of the world, Joel, Nick Storonsky, Anne Bowden, there's obviously a huge number of amazing entrepreneurs, and you have to be a little bit crazy. We've obviously seen some of those entrepreneurs. I think about people like Christian Face. I think about people like Tom Blomfeld, who have gone over to the US, right? And I think Tom has been pretty vocal about what a stark difference he sort of finds being in the sort of Silicon Valley ecosystem versus being in London. And I've been to Silicon Valley before, but I've very, very briefly. So I guess I don't really have a clear view of how different it is. But most people I speak to who have either come from there or who have spent a lot of time there do feel that it's very different. But I think, as I say, the UK does have the benefit of incredibly forward-thinking regulators, and we've got now the scale box that's was recently announced in by government, and we've got in the financial services strategy a new scale-up unit that will be focused on supporting scaling fintechs and scaling neobanks. You've always had a sort of a new bank startup unit. You've obviously got regulators who look at the very large, systemically important banks, but there's sort of this gap in the middle. So I think there's a lot of progress that things are now starting to happen, and obviously government needed, after such a long period of conservative government, they need to get their feet under the table. It's been a year now, and there's a bit more clarity and vision there, and we just have to be hopeful that despite some of the negative headlines we're reading about the impending budget in October, that we can kind of stay on this positive trajectory.
Yeah. We'll unpack a lot more of that shortly, actually. But maybe sticking with the headlines bit. And Oliver, I haven't brought you on to be like representing the entirety of the media, but we like an underdog in the UK, don't we? We like the sort of scrappy, getting it together. The sort of Rocky montage on the way up, not when he had the robot and all the craziness. It's like that way. But when people kind of get to the top, it's different here than it is anywhere else, isn't it? We expect them to be doing panto then, not sort of enjoying the pinnacle, don't we? So what is that about us as people? It just seems a weird hang up we've got.
It totally shifts. The minute that startup is seen as being a real challenger and really, competing in the market, the expectations that I think the public and the media have shift. And often those startups are caught off guard because the media conversation shifts from a very positive, uplifting one to a much more critical look at the business and what's happening and any problems. I can't define what is driving that. I think part of it is the public's desire for coverage and for stories. They love the underdog, but the minute they become too big, they become the big players. The whole fintech story was really about these startups challenging bigger players, David versus Goliath. The minute one of those startups is seen to become Goliath, I think our attitude changes. I think we need to do better, both as as journalists, as the media, but also I think the public needs to change its view, as Val was saying, about supporting those wealth creators, those entrepreneurs that have made successful stories and have really, hired and employed hundreds of people, have created a huge amount of wealth for the country. The public need to be better at supporting them, not just up to that point, but beyond that point. Where do they go next? I don't know how we change the public's mindset on that. I think it's a bit of an uphill struggle. We can learn a lot from America. We can learn a lot from that attitude of Silicon Valley.
It feels ingrained in us, like talking about the weather, doesn't it? Like it's a weird cycle we have. But all right, guys. Well, now we've got a bit of a better understanding of what the current temperature is. We sort of knew what we got right and then knew where we got it wrong. We're going to be taking a little bit of a closer look at some more of the positive points of what might actually be making us a little bit closer to getting our mojo back a bit. So we'll be back after the quick break.
You don't technically need this car. You say that out loud to yourself. You say, I have no space. You say, I'm just looking. Then you click. Then you zoom in on photo number 87 and whisper, oh no. Then you text a friend, the one who always enables you. You say to yourself, this is the last one, knowing it is not. You don't need this car. But maybe, just maybe, this car needs you. Bring a trailer. It's never just a car.
In today's fast-changing digital world, proving your company is trustworthy isn't just important for growth, it's essential. And that's why Vanta is here. Vanta helps companies of all sizes get compliant fast and stay that way with industry-leading AI, automation, and continuous monitoring. So whether you're a startup tackling your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or an enterprise manager vendor risk, Vanta's trust management platform makes it quicker, easier, and more scalable. Vanta also helps you complete security questionnaires up to 5 times faster so you can win bigger deals sooner. The results? According to a recent IDC study, Vanta customers slash over $500,000 a year in costs and are 3 times more productive. Establishing trust isn't optional. Vanta makes it automatic. Visit vanta.com/insider to sign up for a free demo today. That's VANTA.com/insider.
Welcome back to FinTech Insider Insights, where we've been discussing whether we in the UK can actually regain the edge as a global fintech hub, and more importantly, what we're up against in terms of the global competitors for this type of setup as well. I mean, we've touched on it a little bit, but I guess one of the big things that's happening here, and both as you said, Val, later on in the year, the budget's going to be a scary one, but the recent sort of strategy from a government perspective, setting out not really just things that are great for fintech, but like fundamentally things that are going to make things a little bit easier for people to sort of be normal people as well, right? It felt like focusing on, like you say earlier on, oh God, this interest rate's good for my savings accounts, but now I can't afford a house. That seems like a problem, doesn't it? So actually people being able to have a proper strategy for the financial services system, that feels like it's probably quite a good foundational point for the UK.
100%. And I think, I think we have to be mindful of is sort of not taking one step forward and two steps back. If you look at a lot of the regulation, and I mean, if you look at the big red book from the budget, sometimes what makes it into the speech doesn't necessarily, if it doesn't make it in the speech, it could be somewhere else in the really big document. And so kind of reading the fine print is really important. We know that there's a lot of areas that government will be looking at, whether that's capital gains tax. We already knew from several months ago, big lobbying effort with regards to private equity and carried interest. We've sort of talked before about the fact that investors get penalized by buying UK stocks over US or European stocks, again, in terms from a tax perspective. And so again, if we think about wealth creators, if we think about people like myself who, I joined OakNorth before it had even launched, when it was a startup, before it had a single client, a single penny of profit, you're taking a big risk, and you then you get some equity as a kind of thank you for taking the risk. And then, hopefully there's a liquidity event or other liquidity events in the duration of the business that mean, that risk kind of pays off. But we've seen we've read many stories about employees who then didn't quite appreciate the sort of the tax implications and the fact that actually then it wasn't as big a payout as they thought it was going to be. And again, we've had so many changes in government over these, this last decade, that it's hard to keep track of the different regulations. But I think, if there can be some steps taken by government to ensure that the UK remains an attractive place for entrepreneurs, for wealth creators, and for those people with experience in scaling companies as well as starting them, that's all going to be very positive for the UK.
Yeah. And as you say, I mean, the attractiveness to deeply talented people to come here to fix problems, like that's a great part, big part of that puzzle, isn't it? There's a study that came out, Floro's FinTech Capitals of the World survey. London came out third best, and it was just behind San Francisco and New York, but ahead of Singapore and Stockholm still, which I was quite surprised at, given particularly for fintech in Singapore, the amount of investment that's happened there from a regulatory perspective, and the innovation agenda that's kind of happened, and Singapore being a gateway to Asia more broadly. It's interesting that we're still sort of punching above our weight when it comes to a size thing. What do you think, Ollie?
Yeah, as I said at the start, when it comes to those rankings, the UK and London is really holding its own. It's not like we're falling off a cliff. We're very much in their top three. To Val's point, I think we spoke about gatekeepers earlier, the Charlotte Croswell's open banking of the world. Those people are often empowered by politics and politicians. And I think one of the challenges, the sort of unique challenges we've had over the last 9 years since 2016 is just that shifting political landscape where our sort of power players, our gatekeepers, have not had sustained political backing to continue making the changes and improvements that have been needed. And I think that's why you've seen a number of projects which were started in the mid-2010s fall off track a little bit. And I hope, as we were speaking about, maybe there's a sign that the new government, the current government, has more of a plan, more of a focus. I don't yet get the sense that anyone in that government is really excited about fintech, but maybe there's enough enthusiasm there to empower those gatekeepers to really drive us forward, because that is not what we've had, certainly for the last 8 or 9 years.
I think you also need the late stage funding available, right? You often hear about, once you kind of get to Series B, they talk about like it's a no man's land, and there's that challenge, because you get a number of great fintechs and great tech companies that reach that point where they might be looking for like a check of 30, 40, 50 million, and it becomes somewhat impossible to get, a UK or European investor to lead a round. As I say, because of the lack of growth investors that we have here in the UK. Then, of course, you've got, the much larger fintechs, which might be looking for hundreds of millions, if not, even bigger checks than that. And again, that's just not. There's no investor really that you can go to, in this part of the world. So you then have a default to sort of to start to look elsewhere, and then once you've done that, then those investors will say, well, the US is the place to be, or wherever it might be. And we want to have, as you say, feet in the ground here, or boots in the ground here. You mentioned Stripe, and that's a great example of a business that, is founded by European founders. And the only time you kind of get that reminder is every time they speak and you hear their Irish accents, right? And I think we forget that some of those great companies did start in Europe. Obviously, we have seen, some great new initiatives like Project Europe. So Harry Stebbings' new venture, which is really looking to sort of find and identify those great European companies that can, start here, scale here, become, huge companies here. And he's a real advocate for, for Europe, and the fact that it can absolutely compete with the largest in Asia and the US.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. It's like having really good primary schools, but your junior schools and high schools suck. It's like, actually, you can start as many great, startups, you can have as many kids, but like if they sort of fall out of the education system towards the end of it, or there's no latter stage funding or middle stage Series B funding, then that becomes a real problem. But bizarrely, what I've found in the, having had a load of conversations with investors lately, actually US and Middle East investors are looking big ticket. They're looking almost like they want you to have more, because basically, but to your point, Val, it is okay, but once you've done that there, you've got to do it here. And it's like, okay, that's investing in growth, sowing seeds in those areas for things that are successful in other geographies. So it is interesting how different ticket sizes bring out different types of audiences for those things. But if we need a full end-to-end ecosystem, we need great support all the way through, not just a lab or a sandbox, but we need, proper comfort and working with people all the way through the success story, don't we?
And also that, it's also that when businesses get to the point where they could, in theory, raise a mega round, then you've got the acquisition temptation, right? And if you look at the US, I mean, between Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Microsoft, so this isn't including companies like NVIDIA, Netflix, some of the other sort of FANG companies. So just between those five, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Microsoft, between 2019 and 2025, they acquired a company every 11 days on average. And you just like, you can then see that if a business is, again, someone comes to you and says, I'll buy your company for $1 billion, or I'll buy it for $10 billion, right? And we saw that, was it Wix or Wiz, one of the cybersecurity kind of cloud companies several months ago, and they said that overnight, like 1,000 millionaires were created from that acquisition, and that company was, a few years old, right? So I think you also have that point that once you've reached a certain scale, and we've heard about many fintechs being approached by some of the larger institutions here in the UK and in the US to be acquired, and maybe there's a point at which that becomes very attractive. But then again, you see those businesses no longer being British businesses or European businesses, but kind of being absorbed into the US.
Yeah. Yeah, the sort of recycling, as you said earlier on, of talent and funding and, lessons and all of those things are not quite happening in the same way in the US, or not happening here in the same way as they are in the US. I guess to the point on people that we had earlier on as well, and to both of you, I feel like the tide has slightly turned on that one. Like, I feel like actually, whereas I feel like we went through a bit of a no man's land, a bit of an echo chamber of, the when we were great type, book tour vibe. That feels like it's changed a little bit. If I sort of speak to people like Colin Payne at the FCA, or, we've just seen Anna Wallace be appointed the CFIT CEO, we're seeing actually really people who have been there, done it, carries the credibility of the industry, carries the probably goodwill from people that actually you can buy into what they're trying to do is actually going to benefit the whole ecosystem. Again, I don't think anybody's trying to get their MBE or OBE, but actually they're there to solve a situation. Do you think that buys some goodwill for everybody as well? Probably starting with you, Ollie.
Yeah, and I would also look to, former employees of Revolut. There's a huge number of them now who have exited part or all of their holdings and are working on their second or third businesses. There's a huge Revolut mafia coming up, which has taken a long time to get here, but now we're seeing the fruits of that coming through, as well as several other later stage fintechs. And I think that flywheel is really, really important. All of those second time, third time founders that have made mistakes before, they've learnt, and now they're coming back to do it again. I think that's really key when it comes to talent.
So what do you think then? So I feel like I've talked myself into like a positive place. Do you know what I mean? Like like me and you talk, Val, and like I was in a pretty, this is just like, I'm going to have to go to Singapore or something. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is like, I wave to my kids on Zoom meetings, but like, I've got to go somewhere where I can actually do things. Like, but I kind of feel like I'm very optimistic now. I feel like there's momentum, at least in terms of, I don't think we're back to where we were. And actually, but I feel like there's the hunger again. There feels like there's the determination for people to move. But what would be the telltale signs? Like Val, what would you want to see to then like come into my optimistic camp over here? Like, what's the thing that you're not seeing right now that would be like, do you know what? We're getting there.
So, I mean, what I would love to see, we've got the Mansion House reforms, the pension reforms, right? So we know that we're going to hopefully see, larger ticket investment in scaling companies. We've got Pisces from the London Stock Exchange, and this new kind of secondary platform that could then be very interesting and exciting, especially for companies that have reached a certain scale.
Talk about that a little bit, because that actually could be revolutionary for those.
It would be. So, I mean, look, if you're a business, like OakNorth and others, where, you're not necessarily looking for new capital into the business, but you might have some investors that you've had for some time, and they might be keen to get some liquidity and either sell a portion or all of their stake. And that gives you an opportunity to kind of refresh your cap table as well. But it also gives people like us an opportunity to, get a chance to actually buy equity in companies that are still private. It's a really nice stepping stone before you kind of go public. If you decide to go public, I guess it's sort of a way to test the waters a little bit, and it's very innovative. Again, it's a great demonstration, of some of the amazing innovators and forward thinkers like Julia Hoggets and others who we have in the UK. And it could.
Well, and that for me is, to your point, the obsession with an IPO. That's the exit, isn't it? That's what people think about. People don't really generally think about selling their company to somebody else. It's like, it's ringing the bell. It's the whole thing, isn't it? But that is a big stage, in terms of your governance and structure and all of your things around your business. It fundamentally changes your business by making those things happen, doesn't it? So that as an alternative could be revolutionary, I would say.
100%. So I'd love to see that being successful. And, as you say, I think we've been through a bit of an emotional roller coaster over the last year. And there's been, we've seen a really big exodus, right, of wealth creators and wealthy people in the UK, business builders. I think, we're going to see more millionaires leave the UK in the last year than any other country, pretty much, including Russia, including China. So, that's once they're gone, and, they're going to get settled wherever they're now getting settled. But that doesn't mean we can't do things to incentivize new people coming here. And I think, we, as you say, the mood music seems to be more positive. My hope is that come the budget in October, we don't then sort of see a dip again. And once again, people feeling very negative about the UK and, the growth prospects of the UK. It would be great if that's actually an opportunity to build on this positivity that, we've now had from, the recent Mansion House speech and the desire to sort of cut some of the regulation and obviously the financial services strategy and the various inquiries that the government has launched into things like cash ISAs, kind of getting views from the industry. So I hope it's kind of in this sort of positive trajectory rather than we go back to a slump and feeling all a bit depressed again for a few months.
Well, what do you think, Ollie? I mean, it feels like a bit of momentum and there's sort of green shoots, but I guess we didn't get to be successful in the first place by sort of sort of doubling down or stopping when we felt a little bit tired, did we? I guess the green shoots need to be followed with great execution, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at the funding environment, if you remove the kind of 2020 to 23, that kind of unusual period of COVID, I think UK fintech funding is trending upwards. It's trending in the right direction. As we spoke about earlier, those rankings, the UK is still performing well. We're still up there. We're still in the conversation. We mentioned the London Stock Exchange briefly. I would like to see some more activity there, at least. I think the first 6 months of this year, I think it's a 30-year low in terms of funding raised, 160 million in fresh funding raised, which is very, very low. At the same time, the FTSE 100 is at a record high. So there's some positivity at least, but I think that market does need to open up as a route. I don't know what the solution is, but I think if London as a market is closed, I think startups are going to continue looking to the US and looking overseas when they get to those later stages, sadly. But I'm overall optimistic. I think we're in a good place. We just need to keep doing what we're doing and hopefully follow through the rest of this year and into 26.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Like when we, going full circle on this conversation, we talked earlier on about, regulation and technology and opportunity in the market and entrepreneurs to do things and capital coming in. And actually it feels like a lot of those things are sort of on an upward trajectory. Like my hope really, and I don't want anybody to think that we should sort of let my optimistic view muddy the waters of lots of, bad things that have happened over the last couple of years. But I really do have a belief that actually this time it feels like the slogan to the sequel to the movie. It's like, this time it feels coordinated. Like the thing that I would say is, previously I've seen some really great stuff from open banking, but it wasn't followed up with Innovate Finance helping them do something and tripling down, or it wasn't that CFIT and the government were did it. Like actually this time it feels like all of these things together are benefiting from, it's that high tide raises all boats thing. Like I kind of feel like the momentum across all of these different bodies and the momentum across all of these different individuals, it's not just one lightning rod for change. It's actually a movement of people, which is kind of goes back to what we were feeling before. It's just, I think we've all been a little bit bruised by the feeling of the ebbing away of all of the hard work. I think it has been like, many a times where I've been to the gym, like 6 months of effort gets undone real quick, and what we probably saw was, the UK went on a bit of a binge for a little while and forgot what the fundamentals were. And thankfully we've started to see some of those things come back through again. But what would be your advice then for, anybody listening to this who's like, do you know what, I've got an itch, I'm going to go start a fintech company in the UK. What would be the advice you would give them to building a unicorn in the UK? Go on, Ollie. What's your view?
Oh, is it bad to say put AI in your name somewhere?
Investors will love it for sure. Yeah.
To be honest, I think you've got to look for those niche opportunities where there's room for growth. There's a problem still to be solved. I think incumbent financial services have closed a lot of opportunities. The banks have responded and reacted in certain ways. I think fintechs have taken a lot of the easy, low-hanging fruit. So look at the niche opportunities where you can bring AI into the mix and change a sector. Payments is still, massive problems to be solved in payments. That would be my starting point. But happy to have a coffee with anyone that wants to have a chat about that.
Sounds exciting. Val, what do you reckon? Somebody sort of on the precipice of going, do you know what? I can go do this my better mate like self. Like, what would you be your advice?
Well, look, I've been at OakNorth for 10 years. We're a unicorn. So I think one of the best things that I've seen Rishi and Joel do in terms of scaling the business is to give employees the opportunity to participate in your funding rounds. So they actually can put their own hard-earned cash into buying equity in the business. I speak from experience. It completely changes your mindset. Every founder wants their team to behave like an owner in the business. You want them to behave like owners, make them owners. And I don't mean giving them equity or vested shares. Of course, every tech company will offer those things typically. But not many offer the opportunity to also buy equity in the company. And you bring your employees onto your cap table in that way, it just changes the whole culture. Everybody thinks for the long term. They make much more strategic decisions. They behave like owners. And you'll hopefully see much more positive growth as a result.
Yeah, I think that's a really strong point. The culture of a business determines the longevity of it, doesn't it? Anybody can achieve one thing once, but actually, like you say, a decade of performance comes off the back of basically having the DNA that sustains that, doesn't it? And there's nothing more telling than whether people who work there would put their savings into this business in the way that the founders did when they, quit their jobs and did it at the beginning, right? So it's a good tell.
Yeah, skin in the game is a real differentiator for sure.
100%. So, look, we've got it off our chests, right? Do we feel is this been cathartic? Like a
therapy session, guys.
Yeah, you feel better. Ollie, you feeling a bit better about the whole thing now?
I'm feeling a bit more optimistic. Yeah? You guys have changed my mind a little bit.
Up. Yeah, good. Well, we hope you guys out there listening to this are feeling a bit more optimistic as well. I mean, it's a very, very changing landscape. There's great opportunities out there. There's actually great opportunities, not just in terms of building businesses, but building in all of the pieces of the ecosystem as well. Like, actually, it feels like the sequel's hopefully going to be a lot better than the original. But actually, I'm failing to think of any movies where maybe Empire Strikes Back. That was the second movie, wasn't it? That one was badass. Like, if we're about to do Empire Strikes Back, I feel like this is going to get real good. So anyway, on that note, we better wrap up the show. We'll definitely check in as things progress and as these things come to fruition. But thank you so much to our panelists for their time and expertise breaking this down. It's going to be interesting to see how it all transpires. But thank you so much for joining me. Where can people learn a little bit more about you, Val?
Yeah, so if you want to connect with me directly, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Valentina Kristensen. And if you want to learn more about OakNorth, it's OakNorth.com.
Ollie, where can people learn a little bit more about you?
On LinkedIn's the best place, Oliver Smith, and hopefully I'll have some news there very soon.
Very good. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you like what you heard, follow the podcast. Don't forget to leave us a review. Helps us make it better and helps other people find the show as well. As always, if you want to join the conversation, you can find us on social media. Just search for 11FS or Fintech Insider, or email us on podcasts@11fs.com. Us optimistic people are off. Goodbye.
11FS Pulse is where financial services comes to benchmark its customer experiences. Home to over 17,000 hand-picked user journeys from over 800 brands, Pulse showcases best-in-class UX that covers everything from onboarding and payments to investments and business banking. By using Pulse, Monzo was able to cut its product research phase by 90%, and they're not doing too bad. Want to see what all the fuss is about? Book your demo with our in-house experts today at 11fs.com/pulse.
In today's fast-changing digital world, proving your company is trustworthy isn't just important for growth, it's essential. And that's why Vanta is here. Vanta helps companies of all sizes get compliant fast and stay that way with industry-leading AI, automation, and continuous monitoring. So whether you're a startup tackling your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001 or an enterprise manager vendor risk, Vanta's trust management platform makes it quicker, easier, and more scalable. Vanta also helps you complete security questionnaires up to 5 times faster, so you can win bigger deals sooner. The results? According to a recent IDC study, Vanta customers slash over $500,000 a year in costs and are 3 times more productive. Establishing trust isn't optional. Vanta makes it automatic. Visit vanta.com/insider to sign up for a free demo today. That's VANTA.com/insider.